The Galactic Council convened in the Great Chamber of Xipherax Prime, a vast station orbiting a dying star. It was the seat of dominion, where empires crumbled and fates were sealed with a whisper. Here, among the universe's oldest and most powerful species, decisions were not debated. They were pronounced, immutable as the laws of time itself. The chamber itself was a marvel of extraterrestrial design, an architectural symphony of light and shadow. Its walls, woven from crystalline alloy mined from collapsed stars, pulsed faintly, synchronizing with the life rhythms of its members. Above, the cosmic void stretched in an unbroken expanse, the station's translucent ceiling revealing nebulae bleeding color into the abyss. And at the heart of this sanctum, seated upon thrones sculpted from the bones of long-extinct leviathans, the councillors deliberated the fate of an inconsequential world, Earth. The judgment of the elders. Humanity had long been an enigma. The council had observed them in silence, treating them as one might a fledgling predator, dangerous only in its own mind, yet ultimately doomed to be consumed by more evolved beings. They had watched as the species warred with itself, turned against its own kind in senseless cycles of bloodshed and folly. Such creatures, so divided, so self-destructive, could never ascend beyond their primitive state. And yet, Earth persisted. Unlike other fledgling civilizations that burned bright and died quickly, consumed by their own hubris, humanity's presence in the void continued to grow. They had not conquered the stars, but they had reached toward them with insatiable ambition. Their fragile vessels, crude and inelegant, had breached the silence of space, scraping against the edges of interstellar expansion. And now, for the first time, they had been noticed. The Zafren, the most ancient race in the council, were the first to speak. Their leader, Velos the Unspoken, did not use words. He had transcended speech eons ago. His thoughts rippled outward in waves of cold energy, pressing against the minds of those present. They are unworthy of the void. The statement was met with murmurs of agreement. The Virections, ethereal beings whose translucent forms shimmered like liquid starlight, exchanged knowing glances. Their leader, Exact Surreal, flicked a tendril through the air, weaving words into the silence. They are reckless. Their wars defile their own world. Their technology is crude, their bodies fragile. They will break easily. The Xiphorans, towering behemoths encased in exoskeletons harder than neutron-forged steel, let out a series of clicking vibrations, laughter in their guttural tongue. A species of soft meat and brittle bones, growled Primarch Exorvek, his voice like grinding stone. Their greatest warriors would shatter beneath a Xiphoran's grip. The judgment was clear. Earth was to be integrated, not as an equal, not as an ally, but as yet another footnote in the Council's long history of conquest. A protectorate at best, a subjugated dominion at worst. The humans would be given their place as labors, as lesser minds to be guided by superior hands. There were no doubts, no hesitations, until the humans themselves issued a challenge, a test of predators. When the Council's emissaries arrived on Earth, they came not with warships, but with decrees. Humanity would submit. Their world would be restructured, their cultures dissolved, their governance replaced. But the humans did not cower. Instead, they laughed. The delegates of the Council were taken aback. Laughter was not the response of a species on the precipice of subjugation. Laughter was defiance. It was then that humanity made a counteroffer. If you seek to judge us by strength, do not look at our ships. Do not look at our weapons. Look at our world. This puzzled the councillors. What strength could Earth possibly offer? Their armies were meaningless against the technological might of the intergalactic hierarchy. Their ships were slow and feeble. Their warriors, despite their bravado, were mere flesh. But humanity did not speak of armies. They spoke of predators. You wish to know the strength of our kind? Then allow us to introduce you to the creatures that have shaped us. A challenge was proposed. Each species of the Council would present one of their apex predators, and Earth would do the same. A battle would determine the might of each world's deadliest hunter. The councillors scoffed. Was this truly the best humanity could offer? The notion that any terrestrial beast could stand against the bioengineered monstrosities of the Xiphorans, the psionically enhanced terrors of the Virections, or the gene-perfected horrors of the Zafren was laughable. But for the sake of amusement, they agreed. The Colosseum of Xipharax Prime was prepared. Across the stars, creatures of nightmare were summoned. The Zafren dread beast, a psionic nightmare woven from the minds of 1,000 dead worlds, was among them. The Xiphoran apex leviathan, a predator that had hunted entire ecosystems to extinction, stood waiting. And from Earth, humanity, with the calm of a species that had long understood the true nature of survival, simply placed a small, unassuming creature into the Colosseum. A creature that did not know fear. A creature that did not surrender. A creature that would change everything. A creature called the honey badger. The moment before the storm. The laughter in the council chambers was deafening. The assembled rulers of the cosmos could not contain their amusement. Was this truly the best Earth had to offer? A creature no larger than a child's arm, without fangs like a Vorkrath, without the venomous bite of an Exthari Deathstalker? Even as the combatants were released into the Colosseum, the councillors leaned back in their thrones, expecting swift and absolute devastation. Yet, amidst the towering war beasts and bioengineered horrors, the honey badger merely sniffed the air, unbothered by the titanic creatures around it. Then, as the battle began, something shifted. The laughter stopped. The honey badger, undaunted, launched itself toward the monsters that should have devoured it whole. And in that moment, as it sank its teeth into the throat of something 1,000 times its size, the council realized something terrible. They had underestimated Earth. They had misjudged humanity, and they had made a mistake that could never be undone. The Colosseum of Xipharax Prime was no mere battleground. It was a monument to dominance, a planetary arena where the most feared creatures in the galaxy clashed for the amusement of their masters. It had hosted titanic leviathans that consumed worlds, predators that hunted with psionic precision, and horrors engineered in the darkest corners of forbidden science. Never, in the long and blood-stained history of this place, had anything so small entered its halls. The honey badger stood at the heart of the Colosseum, its compact form dwarfed by the behemoths around it. The creature did not pace nervously, did not cower in the presence of beings that could snuff it from existence with a single swipe. No, the honey badger simply existed, unbothered, unimpressed, and entirely unafraid. Across the vast arena, the Vorkrath loomed. The Vorkrath was the pride of the Zafren, an apex predator sculpted from centuries of genetic refinement. It was a horror of sinew and steel, standing 4 meters tall on 6 jagged limbs, each tipped with claws sharp enough to slice through reinforced hull plating. Its obsidian carapace shimmered with a chitinous sheen, pulsing with the eerie glow of bioluminescent veins. A singular, cyclopean eye dominated its nightmarish face, glowing with psionic fury. It was perfect, a hunter without flaw, a nightmare made flesh. The councillors leaned forward, eager to witness the inevitable. The battle had been arranged as a formality, a brief amusement before Earth's final submission. It would not last long. The battle begins. A silence fell over the Colosseum. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with the sound of a shattering thunderclap, the Vorkrath struck first. A blur of obsidian and malice, the beast lunged with terrifying speed, its razor-lined limbs a storm of motion. It moved faster than anything its size had any right to, a nightmare with one purpose: to kill. To the council's expectations, the honey badger should have been obliterated in an instant. They anticipated a smear of red, a pitiful display of resistance before the true contest began between the greater predators. But that did not happen. The honey badger dodged. With a grace beyond logic, the small creature twisted, slipping beneath the Vorkrafter's lunge as though it had anticipated the attack before it even came. It moved with purpose, with a kind of instinctive efficiency that suggested it had faced death before and had learned, long ago, to spit in its face. The Vorkraft hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough, because the honey badger lunged back. Its compact body became a missile of pure fury. The counselors barely had time to process what was happening before the honey badger sank its fangs into the Vorkrafter's throat. A screech unlike anything heard before tore through the Colosseum. The Vorkraft, the greatest beast the Zarthren had ever bred, reeled back, bleeding. The counselors stirred, their expressions shifting from amusement to something else. Something unfamiliar, something close to fear. The beast that would not die. The Vorkrafter's psionic scream rippled through the arena, a shockwave of raw mental energy designed to shatter the minds of lesser beings. A predator's death wail, meant to drive all creatures into instinctive submission. The honey badger did not care. Blood dripping from its fangs, the creature bit deeper. Its claws tore through the Vorkrafter's armored hide, shredding flesh with utter disregard for the concept of size, for the very notion that it should be outmatched. The Vorkraft thrashed, slamming the honey badger against the ground again and again. Bones should have shattered, organs should have ruptured, but the honey badger did not stop moving. It held on with an inexorable will, its body bending and twisting in ways that no creature should survive. With a final, grotesque wrench of its jaw, it ripped free a chunk of the Vorkrafter's throat, sending a spray of blackened blood across the sands. The great beast stumbled. It had never felt pain before, and it did not know how to react. The Council watches in horror. By now, the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. The battle should have been over the moment it began. The honey badger should have been eradicated in the first exchange. Instead, it was winning. The Virections, whose luminous forms pulsed with psionic energy, began to quiver. Their leader, Exaxarail, whose very presence could crush minds, flickered with unease. The Zypherans, warlords of countless conquered planets, ceased their clicking laughter. Primarch Exorvect, whose exoskeleton had weathered the destruction of moons, leaned forward in disbelief. And the Zarthren, the oldest and most enigmatic species of all, whose thoughts could reshape reality itself, sat frozen in a silence that had not existed for millennia. For the Vorkraft was retreating. It had never known fear. And yet, before the honey badger, it now backed away, its body trembling with something it had never before encountered. It had lost control of the battle, and that could not be allowed. With an ear-splitting shriek, the Vorkraft launched its final attack, slamming its full weight onto the honey badger, crushing it beneath its immense mass. Dust rose in the Colosseum. The Galactic Council exhaled. It was over. The nightmare had ended. The honey badger was dead. And then, from beneath the shattered earth, it moved. A low, guttural sound emerged from the dust, a sound that sent a shiver through the greatest rulers of the galaxy. The honey badger growled, and then, with slow, deliberate menace, it climbed out of its own grave, blooded, broken, unstoppable. The moment everything changed, it was at this moment that the Council realized something terrible. This was no mere animal. This was not a predator bound by natural law, by the limitations of biology or reason. This was something else entirely, a force of nature, a manifestation of pure defiance, wrapped in a form so deceptively small it had been ignored. The Vorkraft, the engineered terror of the Zarthren, let out one final, shrill cry, before the honey badger tore out its heart. The beast collapsed. The Council's finest creation lay dead at the feet of something that should not have won. And as the honey badger turned its cold, unblinking eyes toward the Council, they understood the truth. They had not come to judge humanity. They had come to witness their own reckoning. A silence hung over the Colosseum of Zypherax Prime, a silence so vast it seemed to suffocate the very air. The Vorkraft, apex predator of the Zarthren, lay dead upon the blood-stained sands. Its massive, nightmarish body had been torn apart, its armored flesh shredded, its once glowing veins now leaking dark ichor onto the ground. And standing atop its broken form, its fur matted with alien blood, was a honey badger, the impossible victor. The Council had miscalculated. The Galactic Council had known war, had crushed civilizations that dared challenge their rule, had subjugated entire species that thought themselves worthy of the stars. Yet in all their eons of conquest, they had never encountered anything like this. A creature so absurdly small, yet so utterly indomitable. The honey badger had been torn, battered, crushed, and it had refused to die. The counselors, seated on their thrones of dominion, found themselves staring into something beyond their comprehension. This was no mere terrestrial beast. It was a revelation, and for the first time in their ancient, immortal lives, they felt something that had been bred out of them long ago. They felt fear, the broken silence. Exarch-Sarail of the Virections was the first to break. His glowing, liquid-like form shuddered, his bioluminescent skin flickering erratically. This is a deception, he stammered, his voice cracking with disbelief. His people, the Virections, were beings of pure intellect. Their mastery of psionics had made them untouchable, allowing them to bend the minds of lesser creatures, to drive predators into madness with nothing more than a thought. Yet the honey badger had not broken beneath the psychic screams of the Vorkrath. It had ignored them entirely. That creature should have been annihilated, Sarail continued, his trembling form betraying his growing panic. And yet came a cold voice. It stands. The words belonged to Primarch Exorvac of the Zypherans. His species, towering and clad in exoskeletons harder than neutronium, had never considered Earth to be a threat. Biological inferiors, that was what the Zypherans had deemed humanity. Yet the creature before them, this honey badger, did not acknowledge inferiority. It did not acknowledge defeat. And that, more than anything, terrified them. Earth's response. The Galactic Council turned their attention toward the human delegation, still seated at the base of the Grand Chamber. Unlike the counselors, who sat frozen in horror, the humans were smiling. They had known. They had always known. The lead diplomat, Ambassador Elias Mercer, leaned forward, resting his elbows upon the obsidian table. His sharp blue eyes swept across the gathered alien overlords, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, amused. "You were expecting a lion, weren't you?" he mused. No response came. Or perhaps a great bear. A wolf? A tiger? Something grand and majestic. Something worthy of your arena. The silence deepened. Mercer's smile widened. "But you see, we didn't bring our biggest predator. We didn't bring our strongest, or our fastest, or even our most dangerous." He gestured lazily toward the Colosseum, where the honey badger licked the blood from its claws, seemingly unimpressed by the spectacle it had just created. "We brought you this." His voice dropped lower, each word sharpened like a blade. "Because you have no idea what kind of world we come from. A planet of monsters. The Virections, the Zafren, the Zypherans, and every other species present had ruled the cosmos for eons. They had crushed countless civilizations beneath their might, but none of them had ever lived on a world like Earth. None of them had evolved alongside creatures built for suffering and survival. Mercer leaned back, his voice carrying the weight of truth. "Your empires were built in sterile perfection. Your kind ascended in controlled environments, without struggle, without chaos. Ours was forged in fire." His eyes glinted with something dangerous, something the counselors could not understand. "Our world does not tolerate weakness. Every creature that lives upon it is locked in an endless war for survival. Predators do not hunt because they wish to. They hunt because if they don't, they die." The honey badger, still standing, was proof enough. The council's fear. The realization spread across the chamber like a sickness. Earth was not weak. Humanity was not fragile. They had survived because their planet had shaped them into something relentless. And if a mere animal from Earth could defy the laws of their galaxy, then what of humans themselves? The counselors saw it now. Humanity had never been prey. They were something far, far worse. They were adapters. They were survivors. They were the only species in history that had waged war against itself for no reason other than to grow stronger. And if they had done this to themselves, what, then, would they do to the rest of the galaxy? The unspoken warning. Mercer sighed, pushing back his chair as he rose to his feet. This was fun, he admitted, stretching. But we've made our point. He glanced toward the honey badger, still alive, still undefeated, and then toward the council. Earth is not your colony. His voice was calm, calmer than any of the alien minds present could tolerate. Earth is not your servant. He placed a hand on the council's decree, the one that had declared humanity to be a lesser species, and tore it in half. Earth belongs to no one but itself, and with that, he turned. The human delegation followed him, leaving the greatest empire in the galaxy speechless. The aftermath. Long after the humans had left, the councilors remained seated, unable to speak. In the Colosseum, the honey badger sniffed the air once before strutting off, as though nothing had happened. The message had been received. Earth would not be conquered. Earth would not kneel, because the true monsters of the galaxy had just been unleashed, and they were human. The honey badger had left the arena, but its presence still loomed over the Galactic Council like a shadow that could not be ignored. No one spoke. No one moved. The rulers of the greatest empire in the universe sat frozen, their expressions carved in disbelief. The Warcraft, the pinnacle of their engineered nightmares, had been broken and devoured by a creature no larger than a child. And the humans had known. They had unleashed it not as a show of power, but as a lesson the Council could not unlearn. The Council splinters. It was Primarch Exorvac of the Zypherans who finally broke the silence. His voice, usually as unshakable as the mountains of his homeworld, trembled. This is an aberration, he muttered, his mandibles clicking uneasily. A glitch in evolution. A mistake. We should purge their world before. Before what? The voice that interrupted him was low, measured, and deadly. It belonged to Exarch Serail of the Virections, whose glowing form pulsed erratically. The Virections had built their empire through absolute control, dominating the minds of lesser beings with a thought. And yet, even now, he could feel the faint echoes of the honey badger's presence in the Colosseum. A creature so small, yet so completely untouchable by anything they had ever known. Serail's bioluminescent gaze swept across the chamber, burning into his fellow counselors. "You saw it as clearly as I did," he said. "It felt no fear. It felt no pain. It felt nothing." He shuddered. "And if such a thing exists in their animal kingdom, what, then, are their soldiers like?" No one answered. The question was too dangerous. The threat of humanity. Across the chamber, High Warden Sailvass of the Zafren remained eerily still. Unlike the others, her kind did not express fear as other species did. They did not flinch. They did not recoil. But if one observed closely, they would see the faintest flicker of her secondary eyelids, a subtle, biological response to extreme distress. Her race, the Zafren, were masters of genetic perfection. They had spent thousands of years sculpting life, forging creatures like the Warcraft to dominate any battlefield. Yet they had never encountered a species like humanity. "We assumed they were weak," Sailvass said at last, her voice measured, cold. "That was our first mistake." She exhaled, watching the broken corpse of the Warcraft as if it were a sign, a prophecy written in blood. "Our second mistake would be to antagonize them further." A ripple of tension spread through the chamber. "You propose we do nothing." Exorvac spat, his exoskeleton clicking with barely concealed fury. "You would allow them to exist unchecked." Sailvass tilted her head slightly. "I propose," she said evenly, "that we never give them a reason to unleash something worse." For a moment, the words did not register, and then a creeping, terrible realization settled over the council. The honey badger had been their warning shot. It had been an introduction, not a declaration of war, but an invitation, a chance to turn back before it was too late. And the only question that remained was, would they take it? Earth watches, far from Zypherax Prime, Aboard the human diplomatic vessel Tempest, Ambassador Elias Mercer watched the Council's chamber feed from a holographic display. Though the humans had left the Colosseum, surveillance drones remained active, capturing every expression, every glance, every whispered word of fear. Mercer exhaled slowly, pouring himself a glass of amber-colored bourbon. "So," came a voice behind him. He didn't need to turn to recognize Dr. Evelyn Carter, the xenobiologist who had handpicked the honey badger for the demonstration. She leaned against the console, arms crossed, an amused smirk playing on her lips. "Think they got the message?" she asked. Mercer swirled his drink. "Oh, they got it," he murmured. "They just don't know what to do with it yet." Carter chuckled. "You know, when you first asked me for a representative of Earth's resilience, I thought you were joking about the honey badger." Mercer took a slow sip of his drink. "I wasn't." The two stood in silence for a moment, watching as the most powerful empire in the universe crumbled under the weight of its own terror. "What do we do now?" Carter asked. Mercer set his glass down, his sharp gaze flickering with something darker. "We wait. The new reality." And wait they did. In the following months, the Galactic Council began to shift. Borders that had once been strictly enforced began to loosen when human ships passed through. Political tensions that had once threatened Earth's independence mysteriously evaporated. Treaties were signed. Trade routes were opened. And, most importantly, no further threats were made. The Council never spoke of what had happened in the Colosseum of Sci-Fi Prime. There was no official decree, no admission of defeat. But Earth's status changed overnight. No longer were they seen as a primitive species, ripe for conquest. They were seen as something far more dangerous. Something best left alone. Legends in the dark. The story of the creature that refused to die spread through the galaxy in whispers. Some doubted its truth, believing it to be an exaggeration, a human fabrication. But the ones who had been there, who had seen the Vorcraft fall, knew better. Among the soldiers of the Empire, a phrase began to circulate, passed between hushed voices in dimly lit barracks. "Do not provoke the humans. They do not fear pain. They do not fear death. And if you push them too far, they will show you what truly deserves to be feared." Epilogue, the final warning. Deep in the void, in a forgotten sector of space, a Council dreadnought drifted in silence. Its mission had been classified, its purpose known only to the highest authorities. Its target? Earth. Its plan? Annihilation. It never arrived. No distress signal was sent. No remains were ever found. All that was left was a garbled transmission, barely decipherable, filled with screams and static. But one sound came through clearly, a low, guttural growl, and the faint rustling of something small moving through the dark. The Council never sent another fleet, and they never spoke of it again.